This is a video for people considering applying for the Royal Society of Edinburgh Enterprise Fellowship Programme. My name is Dr. Kevin Parker and my company is called KKi Associates. Together with my colleague, Dr. Tony Alhous, we have been operating in the area of startups, spin-out companies for approximately 25 years, and we've probably carried out something like 500 assignments over that time. In particular, we've been working with the Royal Society of Edinburgh for the last 8 or 9 years, doing application workshops to help people produce better applications for the Royal Society of Edinburgh Enterprise Fellowship Scheme. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tony Alhous. I'm an associate of Kevin's. I've been working with him for about 25 years now, and we've covered a whole range of different technology projects across a whole different range of industries over that time. So we're pretty confident that we've seen most of the questions that you'll be wanting to address in putting your application together for the RSE.
Applicants for the programme are confronted by a series of questions, which are currently on a website, previously have been a paper-based form. There are over 40 questions, which can be a little bit daunting. However, they have been reasonably well broken up into different sections. We start off with a number of questions, which I haven't listed here because those are purely administrative questions in section A on the online form, which we're not going to talk about today. It's basically who you are and where you're from. There are questions around people, around you and your team, and we're going to be dealing with those in a separate video. There are questions that we're going to be talking about today around the market and the technology. The questions in red, the questions in orange. Then there are questions on intellectual property issues. Those are mostly in section D on the form. We've highlighted some of those in green, and that's consistent on all of our videos. And finally, there are funding issues on section E towards the end of the application form. Now, there's one question here that is the single most important question for anyone wishing to apply for the Enterprise Fellowship Programme.
Our view is that the most important question is, what do you expect to achieve during the award? Now, this is an unusual one because we're going to more or less give you the answer here, because this helps you to confirm that you're in the right place, looking at the right kind of award for your fellowship. What you hope to achieve is to develop a business plan during the course of the year, which will help you to take your technology to market as a business. So this is not about doing research or development. This is about developing a business plan. The idea being that at the end of the year, you'll be able to start your own business. Now, it may be that you'll also need to develop a pitch to investors, and that may also be an outcome of your year's fellowship. So at the end, you may well have a pitch to put to investors that says, look, I've got this plan, but I need to raise this much money. And are you interested in helping me to get involved in this business and put some money into this project?
Thank you, Tony. We're starting with what Tony and I both agree are the most important fundamental issues for anyone looking to start up a spin-out company, especially a technology-based one. They are the market, the technology, and what we call the innovation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What I'd like you to get into your heads here is the distinction between two commonly used words. One is invention, and the other is innovation. What we're trying to do with the Enterprise Fellowships is to help inventors turn their technical or scientific advance into a commercial idea. And it's really, really important to understand the distinctions between invention and innovation. So invention is when you do something clever in the laboratory. For example, the first ever transistor, that little triangular lump of germanium, and winning the Nobel Prize. Now, originally, the transistor was designed to speed up telephone exchanges. A very useful invention, and as I said, William Shockley won the Nobel Prize for it. However, a few years later, a man called Akio Morita did something that everyone agrees is a classic example of innovation. Innovation is when you take an invention and you turn it into something useful for other people. What Akio Morita did was design and make the first portable transistor radio using the basic, Shockley's basic germanium technology, but miniaturized. And by doing that, by producing that first portable radio, what he actually did was to make recorded music portable and affordable for everyone in the world, for millions of teenagers, for example. And that literally changes the world. So innovation is about doing something useful. You'll also hear people sometimes use the phrases features for the invention and benefits for the innovation, but we're going to use the nomenclature of innovation today. So what can innovation do for you? Well, it can change people's lives. An example is the transistor radio. Another example would be the internet. Where would we be in our current situation without the internet and the ability to make Zoom calls? So the next thing we can do with innovation is save people money. And saving money is a perfectly good and useful form of innovation. The third thing that we can do is to solve people's problems. Some people have difficult lives, some people have unhealthy lives, some people have dangerous tasks to carry out. And if we can make people's lives easier, if we can take the hassle out of their lives, then that's an innovation. And the third picture down, we see on the right-hand side a positron emission tomography scanner. And one of the things we can do with that is to detect metastasizing cancer cells. We can tell a cancer patient whether they're getting better. We can use it to spot the cancer cells, and we can see them responding to treatment. Interestingly, that brings us quite nicely onto the fourth benefit, because as well as the health benefit, that diagnosis makes people feel better. It improves their morale. So making people feel better about themselves is definitely an innovation, certainly a benefit. And that covers a wide range of activities from commercial fashion, right the way through to social enterprises that you might want to start, especially those focusing on mental health. Let's talk a little bit about cancer diagnosis. Now, I mentioned that cancers can be detected with large scanners, MRI scanners, positron tomography scanners, CT scans. Now, these machines are wonderful, but they have limitations. They're very expensive. They're very expensive to buy and they're expensive to operate. The process is time consuming. It can take several hours sometimes to get a scan. It's inaccessible to some patients. Patients with pacemakers, patients with metal implants in their bodies can't use these machines because of the high magnetic field. Patients who are claustrophobic can't use these machines because you're basically put into what feels like a very small tunnel. And all these factors mean that this technology is not used for routine screening, which is a pity because routine screening is generally admitted to be a very good way of early detection and good clinical outcomes from cancer. What other technologies are out there? There's a technology called ultrasound. Now, this is widely available, comparatively expensive. It would be ideal for screening purposes, except the image quality is not as good as MRI. The images are not conclusive for many cancers. So a proposition that we could say, a definition of an innovation would be something like this. Do you know, if we could improve ultrasound images to be as good as MRI, it could save lives and be highly cost effective to the NHS. So the questionnaire to get into the Enterprise Fellowship asks you questions like, please tell us about customers, please tell us about your needs, please give us an executive summary of what you have done. And when you describe your innovation in those questions, you need to be saying something parallel to this. We have developed a way to get MRI quality images from ultrasound. This could greatly increase our ability to screen for hard to detect diseases such as pancreatic or ovarian cancers. The key technical advance is a patented sensor and accompanying electronics that greatly increases ultrasound screen resolution. We've very clearly described what we can do and how we can do it. We have linked the invention and the innovation, the features and the benefits together in some simple sentences. One of the next things that the form wants you to discuss is whether you have any competitors. Now, technologists often fall into a trap here. Tony and I have worked with a number of technologists over the years, and we have asked them, do you have any competitors? And they'll typically say something like this: oh no, we have no competitors. No one else is working on detecting breast cancer by positron tomography. And of course, a quick Google often finds out that whilst they're technically correct, that no one is doing exactly the same thing scientifically as them, there are people working on detecting breast cancers by X-rays, bone scintigraphy, ultrasound of the abdomen. In fact, there are even, as we see in the photograph, medical detection dogs who can genuinely sniff out tumors on people. All those people are competitors of our entrepreneurs in this case. Competitors are people who can deliver the same benefit or the same innovation as you. They're not the people using the same technology as you, and that's very important. There are questions in the form about the market. And some of those questions are fairly quickly answered by a quick resort to the internet, to Google. There are, for our prospective ultrasound scanner, well, there are 62 cancer centres in the UK. There are approximately 800 or 900 specialist oncologists. There are approximately 360,000 patients diagnosed per annum. That means in the UK alone, there are something like 2.5 million patients living with cancer. How many scans do we think are carried out on that group every year? How much routine scanning is done? How many scans might be carried out with our improved technology? Very simple statistics, and those are the kind of statistics that should definitely be in your application form. More interestingly, we have to start in a more complex situation, we have to start asking these kind of questions. How do we get to the market? What might our business model be? For example, do we set up a testing lab? Do we sell our instruments to hospitals? Are there different ways of doing business? The jargon for this is the business model. I like to ask entrepreneurs, so tell me, who's your first customer going to be? Who are you going to send your first invoice to? And think about that invoice. What will it say that we've done for our payment on that invoice? And the shorthand for all of those questions is the business model. And for a startup organization, a technology-based organization like our putative ultrasound business, there are many possible relationships that need to be addressed. Okay, you might decide to sell your ultrasound scanner as a product. You could sell it to end users, to people with cancer, retail business, B2C. You could sell it to business customers, B2B. There might be supply agreements, there might be contracts there. You could sell it to a third party, a wholesaler or a reseller who themselves sells to end users. You might appoint a commercial agent to procure business for you and pay them on a commission basis. Instead of selling products, you might actually sell a service. Instead of selling someone an MRI scanner or an ultrasound scanner, you pitch to the hospital the proposition, well, why don't we just do your MRIs for you? Why don't we just do our ultrasound scanning for you? And there are indeed companies that do this. There are technical service arrangements. We'll show you how to do this. There are joint development programs, particularly in drugs and therapeutics. Let's work together on this. You can sell someone a license. Examples would be, we will let you use our drug when it's gone past phase 3 trials. You can use our brand or trademark on your product. Apart from those business models, there's also a certain amount of cooperation involved in starting up a new company. Agreements where no money changes hands, but will you approve or advise on our product? You might You might have an advisory board. You might have experts or stakeholders advising you. Could we get your customers, clients, or patients to try our product or service? Getting the right business model is something that you will spend a lot of time thinking about should you be awarded the Enterprise Fellowship, because it's really, really important. Let me give you an example. I've mentioned the invention of transistor radios in the 1950s, very inexpensive. At roughly the same time in the United States, people developed the first color televisions. By the 1960s, these had come to Britain. The trouble was they were absolutely unaffordable for most people. They cost possibly the equivalent of £5,000 in today's money. They were more expensive than cars. Very few people were going to buy them. A man called David Robinson started a business where he bought the TVs and he rented them to people. And for most people in the 1960s, the highlights of their TV watching, the Olympics in 1964, the World Cup in 1966, Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins on the moon in 1969, were all watched not on purchased, but on rented TVs. So you can have innovation in a business model without actually needing a new invention. And the invention was someone else's. David Robinson made sufficient money out of this to start a new college in Cambridge, to build a whole new hospital and retire as one of Britain's richest men. How do you find out about business models? One of the things that you're going to have to do is to talk to people. One of the things you're going to have to do in a little bit in order to fill out the Enterprise Fellowship application form properly is a mixture of what we call market research. We've already said to you that you need to find out some basic information on the internet probably, or possibly going to the library, checking out the number of hospitals, the number of patients, that kind of data. In the market research world, that is referred to as secondary market research. It's referred to sometimes as desk research. What you actually need to do is to do a little bit of actually talking to people, finding out what people want. There are some questions on the form that say something like, do you have any evidence that people are interested in your technology? Do you have any evidence that what you can bring to market is wanted by people? And by evidence, they do not want you to quote from websites. They want you to actually go and talk to people. They want you to interview some potential stakeholders. You don't necessarily need to do many of these, but you need to have some evidence that you have actually spoken to people. You have asked them useful, important, open questions, and that they are prepared to say something about your technology. What kind of questions? So questions that we call open questions, questions that can't just be answered with the words yes or no. How do we get oncologists to trust the results of a non-invasive scan? Can we accept any false positives or false negatives? What do patients think about a non-invasive technique? If we produce this machine, who actually makes the buying decision? Is it the doctors? Is it the hospital managers? As a hospital, would you prefer to buy or lease this piece of hardware? We're a new company in the market. What do we have to do to be taken seriously? These are all questions that require talking to people. You will be doing a lot of this if you win the Enterprise Fellowship, but you should be doing a little bit already to fill out your application form.
And then, of course, once you start talking to people, you start getting completely unexpected answers. So if we go back to the question about using ultrasound scanning instead of MRI, we came up with a very unusual response to our questions when we started asking who'd be interested in this. So what we got a high definition, potentially quite mobile diagnostic technique. And what do we think we found? It was for racehorses. This was our application we hadn't thought of, but as soon as people understood the benefits of the application, it became very clear that we had a very high value asset, and it really isn't at all feasible to get a racehorse into an existing MRI scanner.
If I can just interject there, Tony, this is a nice example of a potential niche application. It might well be that that kind of market for racehorses is slightly easier to get into than the main hospital market. There are fewer customers. They've got more money. There's more chance of getting more money out of the individual customers. And all of these things are important when you're a startup business. Okay.
Now we're going to suggest there's some very simple guidelines for you here when you come to communicating about your technology. We're going to suggest that you're brief, that you provide some context, but you make sure that everything is both simple and accurate. You need to bear in mind that the panel you'll be presenting to are not experts on your technology. They're intelligent people, but they won't necessarily know anything at all about the technological area that you're working in. So you need to find a way of communicating it such that the man in the street can understand what it is that you've got. Now, there are only 2 questions about technology, and usually it's quite a straightforward part of the proposal. It's quite easily checked. What we're needing you to do is to link the features to the benefits. It's also good to talk about how good your technology needs to be to deliver the benefits to customers, and these are called technical targets. So if we go back to the ultrasound scanner question, we know, for example, that the oncologists need to be able to detect tumours down as small as 2 millimeters. So the question then is, well, whereabouts are we with our technology? What have we proven at the moment? Taking a very simple case, 2 millimeters detection saves lives, but at 10 millimeters, there's no benefit to anybody. So the question is, are we over on the left-hand side where there's no benefit, or are we there where we're very near to having the level of detection that we need to make a real impact on patients? So this will determine how you describe your technical target. The next question is really just to help people to understand what we call context. So for example, you could have a wind farm that produces 2 gigawatt hours per year. But the question is, well, is that a lot? Is that 1 house, 10 houses, a small village, or a small town? So give people some context to understand how large this innovation is. How big is this wind farm? The next one is a very simple one. Something we worked a little while on, which was a food waste processor. Quite a lot of the food waste is generated in quite large locations, for example, hospitals. So the question is, well, how big an opportunity is this? How big is the food waste problem in the UK? How is it dealt with at the moment? If we go to another if we move to another problem, another technology we may want to look at is something that helps to model blood sugar levels in diabetics. Now, again, people want to know, well, how many diabetics are there? How big an issue is it? How often do people have to be tested? And what's the cost to the NHS of doing blood sugar monitoring at the moment? A few years ago, there was a very major oil company that got into rather a lot of difficulty with the Deepwater Horizon oil leak. One of the questions that was asked was, how much oil is actually leaking from this? And again, we didn't want to give an answer in gallons or barrels. What people wanted to understand was how much was it in practical terms they could understand. So was it an Olympic swimming pool full, perhaps? Or how did it compare with the losses from tankers crossing the North Atlantic during World War II? Basically, we're trying to give people an understanding of how big the issue is and how big the opportunity is. We mentioned the question of simplicity and accuracy. On the left-hand side of this slide is a sentence that was presented to a generalist audience by someone who knew an awful lot about liver disease. Unfortunately, I don't believe they communicated very much at all to the audience. So what we're asking people to do is to think very carefully about how much science they put into their answer and how that science is presented. We actually asked a group of students if they could translate what had been written into something much more understandable for the common man. So if you look at these two paragraphs, they actually cover the same material. Because it's written with shorter sentences, we've taken out a lot of the technological concepts that perhaps people wouldn't be familiar with. One of the ways you can look at how simple and accurate is your writing is to use something called the fog index. And we have here a very simple measure, which is used quite widely to see how difficult or easy it is to understand the English that you're writing. And it's called the fog index. So what we're looking at is how long is the average sentence and how many of the words in each sentence are polysyllabic. And by polysyllabic, we mean words like polysyllabic. If the fog index is too high, you're going to lose many of your readers. And every 10 points you increase your fog index, the reading speed is going to halve and the comprehension level is going to halve. So you really need to look at using short sentences with clear English to give your audience a good chance of keeping up with what you're telling them.
If I can interject there, Tony, in fact, I would recommend that if you calculate the fog index this way, for your application form, you should aim to have your fog index maximum of 40. If it's above 40, it's too much. And I know people will say things like, we have to use some long words to describe our technology correctly, in which case the answer is, please shorten your sentences.
If you want further information, you should take those questions directly to the RSE, who'll be able to answer your questions. Thanks very much for your attention.